Realistically, for a team to build something like this, you're looking at probably 5 to 6 months of work. Ricky's done it in about a third of the times.
The project that I showed was a completely greenfield project.
Welcome to the first episode of Future Bits with Future Foundry. I am Adam, a lead product engineer here at Future Foundry with roughly about 20 years of experience now. And with me is Ricky.
Hi guys, my name is Ricky. I am the founder of Future Foundry. We've been in business for about 9 years now. Before that, I taught programming for about 2 years to over 100 students one-on-one. And before that, I ran a gaming company.
Definitely. And I've been with Future Foundry going on roughly off and on for about 3 years now. We wanted to start looking at what it looked like for us to start doing some content and talking about what we talk about kind of in our private chats day to day, some of our muses, some of our insights, some of our complaints. And one of the hot topics right now is vibe coding. And for those who don't know what vibe coding is, it's essentially the development approach where engineers work in sync with each other and AI tools to, build software faster. Obviously, that doesn't always work as perfect as you would like because you have to kind of understand what you want to ask for. And AI tools have gotten much better, but they don't always give you the code that you expect. So there's an iteration process until you hopefully get to what the expected feature was. And so, one of the next things that we want to kind of talk about is how are we actually using vibe coding in our day-to-day work lives. The both of us are actually working on side projects to kind of really become more acquainted with vibe coding. We'll show off a bit of one of Ricky's projects, but I am also working on one myself. I'm roughly about 10 hours deep, but within those 10 hours, I've been able to accomplish a lot more than I would if I was not quote unquote vibe programming. Would you say that's the same experience that you're kind of having, Ricky, in vibe coding?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I would say that vibe coding, AI assisted coding, which one's which? The line I think is starting to blur a little bit more as AI assisted coding is getting better. But I think some of the reason why we're able to move so quickly is we're able to look under a hood. We're able to look at the code that's being generated by the AI and essentially help guide the AI to produce what we would have wanted a junior engineer to do. Yeah, in terms of speed, AI assisted coding, I'm definitely faster than I would have been otherwise.
Yeah, but you're definitely saying like there's a need for a bit of experience, right? There's obviously some people who are newer, or I have friends who have their product managers even getting into vibe coding where they're able to create things, but I guess there's part of the you don't know what you don't know. And some of that can get into security or, even how to just deploy the application itself, right? There's an array of different places and ways to deploy an application. And unfortunately, maybe getting more difficult as we, add more things to the deployment process. So, that obviously adds a layer of what do I do once I've vibe coded my project or my new feature, right? Like, how do I even get it out to the world? But I think that's a whole different conversation for another day. Yeah, I think we can kind of go into showing a bit off of what you've been working on and tell us a little bit about what it is and what's kind of been working and not working as far as vibe coding goes. Are you kind of writing tests first and then having it use those tests to complete the features, or what is the workflow that you're using and what's worked and hasn't worked?
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive into the work itself, I'll tell you about different products I've tried. So I did try using Lovable. Lovable was very interesting. There was this very immediate dopamine effect just seeing the Lovable software just produce a ton of like front end and back end features. It was super exciting. I ultimately ended up getting frustrated though with Lovable because as I was trying to dive into features with a little bit more complexity, segmented controls, multipliers, basically, I saw that Lovable was basically producing the same error over and over again. And it was hard to just kind of figure it out. Whereas for me, because I have a development background, I was able to work with Cursor more easily. I was able to help guide it along to produce what I wanted. And so with that being said, I'll show you what I've been working on along with my development flow.
And for those who don't know, Cursor is essentially an IDE with tools built in to interact with different LLMs and do the essential vibe coding, if you will.
Yeah. And so for those of you who know me personally, you know that I'm very into cooking as a hobby. Pretty much got into it starting during COVID. And basically, I started facing a problem where there's a lot of recipes on the internet and in cookbooks. And it's actually really hard to figure out which recipes are really great versus not, especially on cookbooks. And so wasted time on a recipe is a lot of time. And so basically I'm making a platform where people can share information about what recipes they find to be worth their time. Obviously, there's more to the platform, which you may see through the demo, but I'll just start with the demo here. What I have is, and some of this stuff was built even in the past couple weeks, to be honest. So for example, this TikTok style feed was something I built within the past couple weeks. And so this is something that I build on my free time. I have to run Future Foundry during the day, but basically nights and weekends, and maybe sometimes during some work hours, I'll invest some time into this software. So basically I produce a TikTok style feed. You can, like content, you can comment. Basically TikTok style feed. I built this within the past couple of weeks. Obviously with the help of Cursor and AI-assisted programming, it was actually pretty fast to code. You can like certain pieces of content, as you can see a comments drawer where other people have commented. Obviously this is all fake data. But yeah, you can see the recipes that other people have tried. And then we have like a search functionality where there's suggested recipes, but if I wanted to search something else, so I'm really into sous vide cooking, there's a search that's been built here. You can also search for books. So for example, Walks of Life, I search that, I can find that here. When you click into it, you can see recipes that other people have cooked from the book already. And so, I can go from here and I can, if I want to rate a recipe from the book, I could do that as well. I can upload a photo or video and all that. Something I literally just coded today is the concept of leaderboards. People are able to rate certain dishes that people have cooked in real life, and in addition to recipes they've tried. So as you can see, literally just like today, I just coded, I leveraged Cursor to help code these leaderboards from the front end and the back end.
Mm-hmm. And, before something like this, maybe even take 2 weeks between two different teams where one team is doing the front end and one team is doing the back end. And here you're able to do both in just a few hours.
Yeah, it's been pretty impressive. And obviously it doesn't get it right on the first try. What you'll do is you'll often just take the error, submit it back to Cursor, and Cursor will correct it. But then in some situations where if it just completely gets it wrong, or if it doesn't understand the product requirements correctly, you can just guide it along the right way.
Right.
Beyond that, you have your profile. So there's a feed associated with each user. So I'm demo user, and basically these are all the dishes that I've cooked as demo user. And essentially it opens a feed based on the things that I've cooked. In addition, you can see the dishes that I've ranked, the dishes that I've cooked, the recipes I've ranked, and the recipes I've bookmarked.
Mm-hmm. This is quite a bit. I know you're not tracking your hours per se on this, but how many hours would you guesstimate that you've actually put into this app?
It's a good question. So, I started at the beginning of the year. Granted, I have built even more functionality that I've decided to not show on this demo or even launch with, which is the benefit, right? You can build more than you launch with, right? You can decide to reduce things down development, I think, will be less of a hurdle to launching. To answer your question, Adam, so let's just say it's been 6 months. So let's just say that's been about 26 weeks. Let's say anywhere between 10 to 20 hours a week. So anywhere between 260 to 520 hours.
Mm-hmm. And, realistically, for a team to build something like this, you're looking at probably easily 5 to 6 months of work, where Ricky's done it in about a third of the time. So yeah, there's definitely a huge benefit to all of the vibe coding, and I think it's only going to get better with time, as well as, I think more people are doing it and more people are kind of learning about how to leverage it better, various workflows. For me, for example, what I'm doing is I ask it to actually create a feature list for me, and then take that feature list and then create an implementation plan. And then I can kind of go through there and like say, I still love my Rails, and so I will tell it to use very specific gems or tools, or even on the front end like ShadCN. And I've found that to help quite a lot. So I have an understanding of what it's supposed to do, and I can kind of direct it through the different feature lists that I want. Because one of the things with vibe programming as well is you're vibing, right? Like at any point you'd be like, oh, all of a sudden I want to do XYZ. And then you run into the case of, maybe not building something of actual value or get you a step closer to that MVP that you're trying to build or release, right? I think that's an unfortunate trap about vibe coding. Is it makes things so easy that you sometimes may lose sight of the overall picture, which is something that we deal with our clients as well, and we have to kind of like reel them back in and say, hey, like we need to get this out and have it tested and all that fun kind of stuff. But when it is so easy to kind of like spin up a feature in a few hours or in a day, right? It definitely changes a lot of things. And I think that kind of gets us into our next point. What does that actually mean for the client when you're able to make use of these tools to do vibe coding or coding faster? I mean, when it's a little more serious and more involved with the client, right? Like I'm doing my due diligence to ensure usually there's tests. B, if there's not tests, that I'm thoroughly looking at the code, checking the code before I commit it. But even in that same vein, right, like I can now do things that took me a long time, like generating a commit message, right? Sometimes just going through all the code and trying to understand everything I changed is, it takes an hour. Now I can do it, in a split second. So there's another, area where some of this AI assisted programming really does come in and shine. I think clients obviously can get more value for their dollar now that we're able to program things faster. But like we said, right, like there's obviously caveats and things and considerations that have to be had, right? And if you don't have those years of experience kind of going through and knowing what to look for, whether it's security related or not, certain things can get through the cracks and cause issues for you or your customers, etc. Obviously, with that, right, because we're now able to kind of provide more value or build features faster, that kind of allows you to focus on things that are more revenue generating for the company, which I think is a huge win for all of our clients. You can build the world's greatest product, but if you're not marketing it, if you're not selling it, if you're not receiving that feedback and kind of iterating with that feedback, right, like it doesn't matter, right? You may not actually build something that hits the needs of the customer, and you just end up building an unfortunate failure. So I think like the focus to be able to actually go and test things faster is much quicker. We can do more A/B tests that we couldn't do before because they were just so time consuming, right? Like if I want to, even now, back in the day, we used to just change the color of the button, right? We've learned what colors work for buttons and all that fun kind of stuff, but there was a time where it took a long time to even try to test that stuff. But now you can easily test anything if you can just kind of swap it in a day. One of the other cool things that I was able to do because of all of this was I had a call with one of our clients, and we were able to kind of work on some of the features live. Obviously, they weren't final, but I could show the customer an example of what I was thinking or what they were thinking, and we could kind of see that in, I wouldn't say real time, but near real time, right? Like sometimes some of these responses, especially depending on which LLM you're using, I tend to use Claude. It can take 3 to 5 minutes to kind of generate all that code and then change everything and then check to see if it even has generated the feature or the code that you need or wanted. But I think the better that this gets, the faster that we're going to be able to move and iterate on some of these features, which then means what does the future kind of look like for development for our clients and kind of even for ourselves. One of the big issues that we have seen is the security side of things, right? People releasing apps where those security considerations that we know to check for aren't being checked for, and you're exposing keys that may exist with one of your third-party providers, and now someone is racking up $1,000 bill on Google or something because they got access to one of your keys, or you're leaking passwords for your customers. I think one of the big issues I've also seen is kind of the regressions that can happen. Sometimes the LLM will take over and be like, you don't really need this feature, even though you've told it not to touch this feature. It's decided to just kind of delete it or something, and then you have to go back and either figure out how to bring it back in or revert everything and kind of start fresh. What are some of the other things that you see the future looking like with vibe coding and all these AI assisted tooling?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think you raise a good point, Adam, about regressions. So the project that I showed was a completely greenfield project.
Right.
And so if you have something that's production and that's live, sometimes the AI assisted coding can just be a little bit heavy handed. I've noticed that when it comes to certain refactors, it's gotten better with the grep commands where it kind of matches lines based on matching terms. But even yet, sometimes they'll forget that there's existing logic and it's there for a reason. And I think that's why Adam is saying that, on his side, he may write some tests to maybe help reduce the risk of regression. I guess, Adam, in terms of your question, in terms of the future, I mean, it's really hard to say. I think today, though, something that might be more possible is the ability to prototype something that maybe doesn't need to be perfect, to test it with a community of people to help validate your concepts. If you get that validation or that traction, then you can kind of, bolster everything security-wise, scalability, all that kind of stuff. It's a pretty interesting opportunity and something that we're willing to explore with our new clients here at Future Foundry, where our engineers will be able to prototype more quickly. As for the future, I guess I really don't know. I do think that it's possibly going to get better. I guess the question is there going to be a player that will come in that will have the infrastructure all figured out for you, kind of like a Lovable, but maybe a little bit more that a developer could interact with? Is it possible that there might be some preset systems that will deploy that you can interact with, maybe like an AWS that's a little bit easier to interact with? That'd be interesting. So yeah.
I can definitely see that happening as well with the way that like Claude and some of these other big players are kind of moving, because Claude in itself has Claude Code, and I can only assume their next step is, all right, you've built something, you need to deploy it. So, and they're buying up companies to kind of help with this. Is that OpenAI? I forget. Someone's already purchased Windsurf, right, which is one of the competitors to Cursor. And then Cursor itself has an agreement with one of maybe Claude, I don't remember who, to kind of have the first come first serve features for the LLMs. So they are building those partnerships, and I think that eventually we'll see the full playground, maybe even as soon as the end of the year, which also means for you and I, what does that kind of mean for engineers in the future, right? Like if our at some point, right, like we'll be more supplying the context and ensuring that things work as expected, but that also means we have time to have other specialties, right? And I think, engineers will now have to become more product focused or even marketing or sales focused than before because, we want to be able to provide not only value in building the product, but with this extra time that eventually we'll get from these AI assisted tools, right? Like what is the other value that we can actually provide to our clients or to the company that we may be working for?
That's a good question. I mean, on one side, you could be the engineer that just builds more,
Sure.
and that ships more, who ships more with client. Now there are other emphasis that, you could dive into, such as security or infrastructure, or just even more advanced features. Something that we focus on here at Future Foundry is our engineers are actually product focused. And so we're noticing that as we build more software for our clients, we're actually providing feedback on designs or usability or flows to our clients so that hopefully things convert more easily, or the KPI has a higher likelihood of being reached. I think there's room to either build more or to focus on other disciplines adjacent to application development.
Definitely. Well, the future is bright and interesting, and the team that we have here at Future Foundry is very good at adapting and moving with the times. And so, it's good that we're investing time into understanding how to actually make use of these tools and how they can benefit our clients so that they can get more bang for their buck at the end of the day.
Yeah, I have a goodie. So I didn't really show my flow. So basically, here's my cursor. So you saw the application, and now this is my work environment. So yeah, basically I started, before I had two instances of cursor, one for my back end and one for my front end. But now I just have it both in one cursor IDE, right? One cursor instance. And so in terms of the past couple days, basically I had a model, it was called Rankings. And basically as I started building more features, it was possibly about time to refactor and split the Rankings model into critiques, dishes, and bookmarks. The thing is that Rankings is very fundamental to a lot of the code. And so basically with AI assisted coding cursor, I was just like, screw it, let's give it a try. Normally without AI assisted coding, a refactor like this would have taken a while actually, but basically it took about a day, I would say, maybe 12 hours. And so I, just to tell you what that looked like is, I mean, I basically, one is I debated with Cursor, what should I do? Cursor gave me opinions. Cursor actually thought I shouldn't do it. Cursor was like, you know what? Probably don't go with this refactor. You can figure it out. But for me, I just felt like, you know what? I just wanted the separation of concerns. I just wanted a lower likelihood of getting to errors. And these are the decisions that, with time and expertise, one would make. And so basically I said, you know what? Let's just do it. Here are the models. What do you think? And he said, okay. AIs are typically people pleasers, so they will typically ultimately agree with you. But anyway, so I gave it the go ahead, and then it did a swap, like a huge change in code. But at first, it attacked the models, it attacked the migrations, and then it attacked the controllers, right? And then the routes ultimately. What I will say is that a lot of things did break on the first try. That's, to me, that's okay, because it was able to do a lot of the work. I would say maybe over 50% or whatever, 40%, what have you, right? And then basically for the subsequent hours, right, I was able to debug the rest of the system. I said, hey, this route is not working anymore, please fix, right? So I don't even have to go in and look at the exact issue. Cursor one by one will look at the issues and address them.
Right.
I will say as well, it did mess up on some of the logic as well. So it's important that you review everything Cursor does, or when you feel like it's probably going to make a issue like that. So I looked at my git diff. I saw, okay, it didn't transfer this logic over. I said, hey, keep this logic in place. So it brought it back in. So yeah, it was a lot of work, but again, I think a lot faster than if I would have done it without AI assisted coding. So that's one thing. And then I'll just, talk a little bit about the leaderboard routes I literally just did before this call. I'm at a point in my interaction with Cursor where I'm just going to tell it, I want a new page. I want it to render leaderboard information. Basically, what that means is the top recipes and the top dishes that have been cooked by the community. I want to use these components that I already have, right, as headers and as individual rows within the leaderboard. And then I also want new backend routes to supply this information. And so it actually did very well on the front ends. Obviously, you can then reply with some additional tweaks, which I did. The back end, it did not work immediately, but then I just gave it the error that it produced and then it patched itself back up. Again, very high level, right? That was, initially a singular prompt that I said, in the front end, I want this. In the back end, I want this. It's really impressive. Definitely faster than if I'd done it alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've found it best to have both the back end and the front end within the workspace so that it can look at both. Because if not, then you either have to instruct it to, let's say you start with the front end, you have to then have the front end instruct how you want to build the back end, or they're kind of building independently, and then you're kind of going back and forth trying to get one to work with the other versus, I can see exactly how the back end is working by just grabbing the files as I will, and then actually generate the code that's needed, which also just means that iteration is faster, right? I'm able to iterate faster because even if it does mess up, it can kind of go through both the front end and the back end and see where that mistake may be, and then hopefully, correct it the first go around. Not always the case, but it's much better than the guesswork when I was trying to have them separate. So I think, either you're providing both the front end or the back end, or we're going back to, the good old monolith where everything kind of lives in one app, which is kind of what I'm doing with my project. Is it's a monolith, but when I've tested this against, a lot of our clients' projects, a lot of them have back end, front end. So you're having to bring in both. So sometimes I have to change the folder structure or just make use of the workspace so that I can have both the back end and the front end.
Anyways, I try to not, I guess we're saying a lot about, how things are definitely faster and everything. And for the greenfield, for sure, right? Yeah. And then the question is, what about in production code bases where the stakes are a little bit higher, right? If you push a regression, there's more of an issue. And so, I guess we'll see. Yeah, just wanted to, share as people of technical backgrounds what we've been working on, and also just to share our experience working with these new tools.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And leave us down below in the comments your experience with vibe coding, and if there's any workflows or suggestions on how to improve even our vibe coding experience, let us know.